No, I'm not going to start singing, boys and girls, but good morning. I thought I'd play a wee song for us to introduce what we're learning about today, which is more about time. So last week we looked at, with regards to time, we looked at reading clock faces, being able to look at a clock and decide what is that time. So we looked at o'clock if the minute hand's pointing up to the 12. We looked at half past if the minute hand, the big long hand, is pointing at 6. And we looked at quarter past or quarter to for my squares and stars last week if the minute hand is pointing at 3 or the 9. But this week we're moving on slightly. We're still looking at time, but we're going to look at answering time questions. So solving questions about time when we have to either move on the time or being able to work out what time we're doing certain activities, but that'll be later on in the week. So today what we're looking at, I'll turn us over to our clock, away from my face, and that looks good to me. So this lesson is going to be about moving time on. So moving it on, we'll start with an hour or back an hour to start with. Then we'll look at slightly if we're adding on more than an hour or less than an hour. But we'll start with a wee bit of revision. So looking at that clock face there, can anyone have a guess what, well, you don't have to guess because you know now, so it shouldn't be a guess. What is that time there? I will give you 1 second to have a think. That's your time up. It is 3 o'clock because our hour hand's pointing at the 3 and that tells us the hour, and our minute hand is pointing at the 12 and that tells us our minutes. And if it's o'clock, it's 00. So this is 3 o'clock here. We're going to start by moving this on 1 hour. Now there's 2 ways I could do this. I could either move the minute hand all the way around, which would give us 60 minutes. Now that's the way I would normally do it, but when it's an hour, there is a wee shortcut we can use, because what was this hand here? It is the hour hand. So if we're moving on 1 hour and we're working out the time 1 hour later, we can move this hour hand on 1 hour to take us to the next hour, which would be 4. So what time is that now if we've moved on an hour, or we've found out what is the time 1 hour later after 3? We know that that time would be 4 o'clock. And our minute hand is still going to be pointing at the o'clock because adding on 1 hour is the same as that minute hand going all the way back round to where it was again. So that will give us 1 hour there. Let's move on another hour. This time we'll move the minute hand. So I'm moving the minute hand round, all the way round back to where it started with 12. So our hour hand's actually moved for us, because remember, when the minute hand moves, so does the hour hand, and the hour hand just moves slower than our minute hand there. So we've moved on 1 hour again. We were at 4 o'clock, but now, as you can see, I hope from the screen, move that round, you are at 5 o'clock. Let's try a slightly different one now. Let's say we were going back an hour to work out what was the time 1 hour earlier. Well, let's start with our minute hand. So we'll go back the way, back round the clock. So our normal clock goes round this way, but we're going back the way. Back to the 12. And that's put us back an hour to 4 o'clock. And the same will apply if I move my hour hand. So we're starting at 4 o'clock, but we're looking for the time 1 hour earlier. So let's move our hour hand back to the hour before, which is there, 3 o'clock. Nice and straightforward, boys and girls. I don't think we'll have any issues with that. Where it becomes a little bit harder is when we're looking at adding on more than 1 hour or taking away more than 1 hour? Let's say there was a question that said, you started your gymnastics, put on my face here. You started your gymnastics practice at 10 o'clock. What is the time 2 hours later? And back over. There. So, let's get 10 o'clock all the way down to 10. And remember, gymnastics starts at 10. We've got to find out the time 2 hours later. Well, we'll go for our hour hand and we'll move our hour hand along 1 hour to the 11 and then 2 hours to the 12. Because remember, when this hour hand moves to the next number, that's 1 hour. And there are 12 hours in this clock. So let's move it on 1 hour and 2 hours. And now it disappears because it's hiding behind the minute hand. And that gives us 12 o'clock because we started at 10 and we moved on 1, 2 hours. And remember, when we're adding on an hour or taking away an hour, the minutes don't change because an hour means it goes all the way back to the start again. Looking at a wee bit earlier on now, let's say the question was, I don't know, you started shopping at, let's go for you start shopping at 9 o'clock. Nice and early. You start shopping 9 o'clock. You actually woke up 4 hours early because you were really keen to go shopping. So, we're at 9 o'clock. We want to find out what was the time 4 hours earlier. Well, let's count together then. We're at the 9 here, and remember we're going back the way, or we're taking away an hour each time. We start with our 9, and we take away 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and 4 hours, taking us all the way back to 5 o'clock. Now, how many times will that hand go all the way around and back to the start again if we're taking away 4 hours? Well, let's see. Let's take away another 4 hours. Let's count. So it goes all the way around once, twice, 3 times, and 4 times. Because remember, like I've said before, the minute hand here, if it's taking away an hour, it will go all the way back round to the start again, because that is 60 minutes, the same as 1 hour. So what I'm going to say just now is, for my circles and triangles, this should be enough for you. What I've taught you should be enough for you to get started with your work. You have 2 choices. You can either stop the video now and get started on your work, which is absolutely fine. Or if you cannot get enough of my ugly mug, you can keep watching the video and learn a little bit more about some of the things you'll be doing probably towards the end of the week when we learn about these things. But stars and squares, make sure you're continuing to watch. Okay. So if you remember, at the start of the video, I said we would look at an hour earlier, or an hour later, or earlier, or we'd look at a couple of hours later, or a couple of hours earlier. The last one we're looking at is what happens when you're taking away or adding on less than 1 hour. Because when it's just an hour, it's quite simple. We just move round once for adding on an hour, or back the way for taking away an hour. Nice and straightforward. It's going to annoy me. Here we go. But if you're taking away, let's start with less than. If you're going earlier, but you're not actually taking away a whole hour, you're only taking away half an hour, where do we think we'll end up? I'm stroking my chin just now. I thought I'd let you see that, because I'm puzzled as to what the answer would be. Well, for these ones, I'm going to say we have to, well, I'm not going to say, I'm saying we have to use our minute hand if we're taking away less than an hour. So if we're doing half an hour, we want this minute hand to go back halfway. So a whole hour would be all the way around, but if it's only half an hour, we go back to halfway round the clock, which is here, giving us a time of, we were at 1 o'clock, now we've taken away half an hour, which puts us to 12:30 or 12:30. And let's say we wanted to go back half an hour earlier again. Well, if you remember, half an hour is 30 minutes, and 30 minutes is half of our clock. So if we're taking away another 30, it'll take us all the way back up to our 12. There we go. Let's look at another one because that's a wee bit tricky. So we'll just take our time. Let's go to 8 o'clock. And let's say we're moving on half an hour. So what's the time half an hour later? Well, before we even look at the clock, if we're doing half an hour later, we remember, or we should remember, that half an hour is 30 minutes. So we know straight away that our time, if we're adding on half an hour, which is 30 minutes, will give us 8 ... Let's split the numbers up here, the hours and minutes, and then a 30 here. So that means when we try it on our clock face, we can check it to make sure we're right. And if we get a number like this, we'll know we've not gone far enough. And if we get a number like this, we'll know we've gone over 30, we've gone too far. So our time would be, if it was half an hour later, 8:30 or 8:30. The last one I'm going to give us, it's nice and easy. Once we get our head round this, it means we can do any number. We could add on 5 minutes, we could add on 10 minutes, we could add on another half an hour. It's all nice and straightforward. But the last one I wanted to give you was, let's make it a wee bit harder. Do I want to do that? Yeah, why not? We're a clever bunch. We'll start at 7. I want to know the time 1 hour and 30 minutes later. So 1.5 hours later. How do you think we'd do that? You're so quiet today, boys and girls. I will start with our hour. Let's move on an hour because we can do that nice and easy. We know that if we're adding on an hour, if it's an hour later, it'll be all the way back round the clock once. But we also have to add on our half an hour. And if we remember, when we move on half an hour, it's halfway round the clock or 30 minutes later. Meaning, if we started at 7 o'clock and we added on 1.5 hours, or 1 hour and 30 minutes, it takes us to 8:30 or 8:30. If you're ever in doubt, boys and girls, hello again. If you're ever in doubt, what you need to remember is, going round the clock, there are 60 minutes in a clock face. First point to remember, 60 minutes in a clock face. The second point to remember, and I'll move us back to the clock now, is that each of these numbers, we move our minute hand on, we're going up 5 each time. So we'll start here, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, 60. So if we're ever stuck, or if it's maybe not as neat and easy as adding on half an hour or 1 hour, and it was maybe taking away 10 minutes, we know that if we jump 5, 10 back the way, that's us taking away 10 minutes. But that's a question for another day. Hopefully, that should be enough to get us through our task today and tomorrow. Later on in the week, I'll have another wee video for us to watch about our last couple of tasks before we move on to look at a different part of time. So, good luck today. Remember your basics. If you're stuck, you can re-watch this video, or I should have about 2 or 3 videos now about time to go back and watch. So I might not be there to answer your questions, but I'm there in video format that you can watch. good luck with your task today. Have a lovely Monday, and I will see you soon. Goodbye.